This inflation that's been going on, it's not 10 years old, it's not 20 years old, it's not even 50 years old. It is about 90 years old. And I'm counting back from 1933. Why 1933? Because that's when the dollar gold exchange rate was fixed at 35. That's when FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, changed it, or whoever was advising him, probably wasn't him, changed it from 21 to 35. And at that point, that deflation from $21 an ounce to $35 an ounce was enough to get the price system back into whack, I would say, and keep things going. But since then, the money printing has been constant, and they tried to lie about a gold dollar exchange rate of $35 until 1971. And then in 1971, they stopped lying about it. They stopped lying and saying that a gold ounce was exchangeable for $35 because it wasn't. But this inflation has been going on since the $35 change. So that's about 90 years. But in terms of can it go on for another 10 years? I don't think so. I mean, I remember as a kid in the 90s, I didn't hear about everybody being in debt all the time. And there were some struggling people, but, I lived in a, middle class, upper middle class area where people generally had savings and people were upwardly mobile and, things were generally high standard of living. But I remember it changed around 2006, 2007. People were going into debt to buy houses, and then they lost. Debts are still overhanging from there. People everywhere are in debt. I don't know anybody besides rich people, who are not in some kind of major net debt. It's at these turning points when things implode. What I think is going to happen is there's going to be a grind. I don't know how long it's going to take, a few months, maybe a year. There's so much massive stuff going on deep down in the bowels of the monetary system that anything could trip a wire somewhere that nobody saw at any point now. What I think is going to happen, just based on how these things have happened in the past, and these things have happened in the past, is that we're going to see an orderly decline of the dollar in its purchasing power. I don't know against other currencies. I'm not saying against other currencies. I'm saying purchasing power in terms of real stuff you can buy with it. It's going to go down and down and down. Things are going to get more and more expensive. And because everybody basically agrees, almost everybody, the real diehard fiat people, they know this isn't sustainable. They know that this whole system doesn't work because debt just accumulates and accumulates and it never ever goes down. You cannot sustain any system like this. It's against nature. Nature doesn't work like this. Nature balances. This system doesn't balance. It just accumulates and accumulates. Everybody knows it's doomed. But at a certain point, when it becomes obvious that the dollar is really losing purchasing power, at that point, it's going to go fast, like maybe weeks or even days. Like in Weimar, right? We've seen hyperinflation before. It happened here in Israel in 1984. It happened in Weimar in 1923. It happened in many different countries, but only in isolated currencies that always had an index currency to go back to. The only difference is it's the index currency itself. It's the dollar that's going to crash. And then where do all the other currencies indexed to the dollar go? They can either go back to gold or, the entire monetary system is going to implode and you're going to have to break up into private monies, which could be better longer term, but it's going to be much more chaotic short term. Just like in Weimar, you saw an inflation that took from about 1918 after World War I to 1923, but it really, really sped up in mid-1923. It took about maybe 5-6 months. And the only thing that was slowing it down then was the fact that people had to be paid in physical paper. You had to distribute the stuff. So it took time for paper to be distributed throughout the country because you had to transport it on trains and you had to give it to people physically, hand it to them. Now you don't have to do any of that. Payments are instantaneous. Bitcoin, Apple Pay, however you want to pay. Bitcoin is just another form of dollars, in my opinion. But you can get rid of dollars in an instant. Like that. You can get rid of everything. Spend it all in a second. We've never seen a hyperinflation in this kind of technological environment before of a base currency like the dollar. So it could be, food prices double in a month and then they double again the next month. And then, a few days after that, just bam, nothing. I don't know because we've never seen this before. We've seen qualitatively the same thing. We've never seen quantitatively this much of it in the sort of technological environment of money transfer that we have today. I don't know exactly, but protect yourself now before any of this happens. The only reason the dollar has any value is because it can still be exchanged for some amount of gold. Only if a few people do it. If everybody does it, gold would be something like $40,000 an ounce. I come to that calculation based on the Fed's balance sheet divided by the amount of gold in Fort Knox that's backing the balance sheet. So if you go back to the Great Depression and the economic damage that was caused, or no, not that was caused, that was revealed by gold moving from 21 to 35, that's about 60%. Imagine the incredible depression that would result from gold moving to 30,000 in a few weeks. I mean, God, I don't even want to think about it. I don't think we should even think of it this way. Don't even think of it that way. It's not really the gold price increasing. It's the dollar collapsing. It's the dollar losing its purchasing power. If the exchange rate, the monetary exchange rate between gold and the dollar were suddenly moved to 5,000, then what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen is everyone's going to call in for their gold immediately. Then it's not going to stop at 5,000. Once you get to 5,000, you're going to get to the real monetary exchange rate, assuming there is one, assuming there is gold at Fort Knox. It's not going to stop at 5,000. That's the danger. That's what we're talking about. I mean, at some point, it's not going to be an orderly decline in the purchasing power of the dollar. It's going to go from, let's say, 2,000, and then the next day 3,000. I don't know what the numbers are going to be, but if you look at commodities priced in gold under that scenario, commodities will be pretty cheap in terms of the gold price, because that's the real money. That's what gives the dollar its purchasing power, the gold that is behind it. It's not behind it at a fixed rate, but it is still behind it because you can still exchange for that gold. So once we get to that point, 4,000, 5,000, it's going to be the free market pushing the dollar to its monetary parity at whatever the balance sheet of the Fed is, divided by the amount of gold in Fort Knox.